Hey guys, it's day 10 of our adventure flying this plane from the Netherlands all the way down to South Africa. We are currently in Khartoum, Sudan, which marks the halfway point in equidistance of this journey. So it's 3:30 a.m. and we are just waiting for the fuel guy to bring our 200-liter drum to refuel before heading to our first stop in Kenya. Sudan has been incredible, but we want to leave here as soon as possible to prevent getting stuck in the bad weather on the ITCZ. The ITCZ is the Intertropical Conversion Zone, which is notorious for thunderstorms, and we do not want to get stuck in bad weather over South Sudan. So let's get fueling, and then during the flight we'll update you guys on the journey so far and answer some questions that you guys have asked on Instagram. While pre-flighting the airplane, our 200-liter fuel drum finally arrived on the back of a pickup truck. The friendly staff proceeded to install a hand pump, which leaked more fuel than it actually pumped through to the tanks. It pumped so poorly it took about 25 minutes to refuel 70 liters. In the meantime, I cleaned off some desert sand from the windshield, which had accumulated over the past few days when we were gone. Since the hand pump had now completely broken, Maurits came up with a new solution, transferring the fuel from the drum into our jerry cans and then to the wing. Although even more messy, it did speed up the process significantly, but I did have to bite my lip when seeing quite a bit of the precious and expensive fuel go to waste. We then paid for the fuel in cash, and after 1 hour of refueling, we were finally on our way.
Khartoum Tower, good morning. Zulu Uniform Sierra Hotel Whiskey.
Zulu Uniform Sierra Hotel Whiskey, Khartoum.
Zulu Uniform Sierra Hotel Whiskey is on the apron, 2 PB for flights as per flight plan to Hotel Kilo Lima Kilo. Ready for startup.
Whiskey startup approved. Report ready for taxi.
Clear prop. We just paid $8 a liter, $1,600. Let's get out of here before we have to spend more money.
Zulu Uniform Sierra Hotel Whiskey, climb 095, maintain runway heading, contact approach 124.7, wind report 250 degrees, 3 knots, runway 18 leave for takeoff.
Code cleared for takeoff, thereafter climb 095 on runway heading, and then on to 124.17 Sierra Hotel Whiskey. Thank you.
Have a safe flight.
Thank you. Yay, everything's looking good. We're heavy. I let it roll a little bit more because we're heavy.
And it's hot. Bye, Sudan. You've been a real treat and expensive.
Okay, so for everyone wondering, we just spent $3,000. Wow. Waking up the city.
Yeah.
Zulu Hotel Whiskey, Khartoum, morning.
Zulu from Sierra Hotel Whiskey on runway heading, climbing level 095.
Climb 095, and confirm exit point.
Exit point is load up, climbing 095, Sierra Hotel Whiskey. It's 5:40 and we've got the perfect view of the rising sun. It is so stunning through the haze.
So we've established at our desired cruise altitude of 9,500 feet, and we're actually having a 50-knot tailwind, which is crazy because we planned at 125 knots and we're cruising at 145 roughly, which means it's 20 knots faster, which is a massive difference. So instead of a planned flight of 6 hours, it says it's going to be 4 hours and 30 minutes. So that's a significant difference.
It sure is, and we're cruising along, and it's so nice to see the terrain change. It's still quite flat here, but there's so much farmland. You can see what a resource the Nile is for all these people and how lush it actually is. I'm surprised. I thought it would be way more desert-like. That's what we saw in the north of Sudan, but here it's lots of farmland, quite green. Can't see it perfectly because it's still a little dark. As we mentioned earlier, Khartoum was ridiculously expensive, so people that don't fly might not know that when you fly into a country with a small plane, you need to apply for a permit, so kind of like a visa for your plane, and then you need to have a handler, so someone who helps you on the ground, helps you out with sorting out fuel, all that kind of stuff, and you cannot get around it. You have to pay for the handler. So that was all altogether like $3,100.
Including fuel.
Including fuel. Fuel was $1,600 because we had to get a drum, and as you can see in the videos, it was quite a hassle to get that 200-liter drum into our tanks, especially because their hand pump wasn't working. But Maurits used the jerry cans, and we have a bit of fuel in the back now as well. So we can use that and put it into the wings when we arrive in Lokichogio, where we actually have another 200-liter drum ordered, and I think they brought it there by taxi from Mombasa, which is actually all the way by the coast. So that's kind of how you plan your flights like this. You have to get fuel sorted. A lot of these airports don't have avgas because they just don't have a general aviation scene, and they just only have jet Jet A1 diesel for the bigger planes. So that's why it's so expensive.
Uniform Sierra Hotel Whiskey Khartoum.
Go ahead for Zulu Uniform Sierra Hotel Whiskey.
Contact control 1273.
1273 next. Thank you. Zulu Uniform Sierra Hotel Whiskey.
Alright, so in the past 10 days we've flown from Holland to Austria to Italy, onto Greece, Egypt, Sudan, and now we're on our way to Kenya. And it's been about 25 hours of flying. I forget how many legs, but I think it's about 9. We've been having such a joy in SHW, one of the first Sling High Wings, and it took a little getting used to, as it is always in a new aircraft. But now we know we're flying here with our eyes closed, basically, and she's performing super well.
Another thing that's amazing is having the PFD here, so the Garmin screens. It has everything. Especially in Egypt, we've had situations where they really want us to rely on our IFR equipment, which shouldn't be the case because we're flying VFR, but this plane has everything, so it's really saved us quite a few times. And we've actually had tailwind almost all of our flights, which is amazing. It's really great to plan conservatively like Maurits is doing, and then every flight is a joy when you use less fuel and you get to your destination earlier. The only moment when we had a little bit of stress about our routing was when we flew into Khartoum, that we arrived with a lot of thunderstorm buildup around us, and we got a relay from an Air France aircraft, and they also gave us information from their weather radar. They helped us dodge the thunderstorms when we arrived there at night, so it was a little bit chaotic, but learned a lot from it. Good learning experience.
So before we head up into the Q&A, I think it's important to thank our sponsors. We've been using FlightChops, and it's been an absolute lifesaver all through Africa, so detailed, finding new airstrips, planning ahead, finding wind, fuel planning. So it took a little getting used to as everything that's new, but now like 10 hours in, it's super convenient.
And another big thank you to Monogoto, who issued us with a worldwide SIM with cellular data everywhere, and it's been such a massive help, especially in Egypt and Sudan and along the way down through Africa. Everywhere we've gone, even in Meroe, so in the middle of nowhere, we've been able to have cellular data connection and been able to message our handlers, been able to check the weather and prepare our flights, and without it, it would have been absolute chaos. So we're really grateful for that as well. But as mentioned, we're going to do a bit of a Q&A. On Instagram, I asked people to ask some questions that they had about this trip or about aviation in specific or about us. So we have a few questions that we're going to go through. We haven't actually looked at them yet, so I think it might be best if you read them out and I'll answer them. We have got nowhere else to go, and we'll have time to answer your questions. Question number 1.
So the first question, probably really relevant as we're flying over Sudan right now, is it safe to fly over and or land in Sudan?
Really good question. I think a lot of people, including ourselves initially, have a misconception of the country of Sudan. There's been a long history of civil wars and the coups, and what we realized when we were here is that Sudan is a relatively safe country. We did not feel unsafe whatsoever throughout our time in the country. We are flying pretty high. Sudan and Egypt, they really want you to follow either airways or fly at a minimum safe altitude, which is often above 8,500 feet. So I think having that altitude is quite safe. In the sense of, is it safe to land there? Yes. Khartoum Airport is massive. It's an international field. We're not landing at any smaller airfields, but I do think that if you plan correctly, it should be safe.
Yeah, and maybe to add on to that, I think South Sudan is where there is a little bit more of a danger right now, and we're not planning to land there. We are overflying it, and we did take some precautions that within flight I dotted out small airstrips because firstly the weather can be a problem there, and secondly if we run into any trouble then at least we immediately know where to go. The UN is active there, and in all places where you go, you have to assume that people will be nice to you, and if you treat them well, they'll treat you well. And obviously unfortunate things can always happen, but the same goes for anywhere in the world. If you get an engine failure or an issue in any awkward place, then it can be a problem.
Sudan itself, I've realized that everybody we met was super friendly, and even the officials. We went on our trip to Meroe, we went by road, by car, and passed 6 or 7 police checkpoints, and every single police officer was very friendly.
And important, we did have a guide and a driver and a company arrange everything for us, and I think that might be the important thing to do here. Maybe you probably can adventure on your own, but doing it in a group or with a guide that just knows the language, knows what to do, get their quiet permits, It's not just like in Europe where you can just go wherever you want.
Be respectful of the culture and understand that in some countries it is a lot more important to be very respectful to officials. For me, for example, I only wore long pants and covered my shoulders, and I think you just do your best to fit into a culture and respect their values.
Another question is, how do you get the confidence to fly into airspace you've never been in? Are you scared of messing up?
For me personally, I love flying into new airspace. I think the adventure is so worth it. I remember when I just started flying that it was a bit more of a daunting thing. But at one point, I had this moment of realization that it is okay to make mistakes with your radio calls. It's okay to ask them to repeat their request. You just have to make sure that your planning is good, and everything you do beforehand to prepare your flight will save you during flights. So my biggest tip is prepare and don't be afraid to make mistakes. Take your time. ATC are there to help you.
And also in both of our flight trainings in South Africa, at least I went to Cape Town International. Nice to practice that during your flight training, and if you don't get that exposure, then maybe take someone with you, but make sure you sort of agree that you'll do everything and that person's just there to maybe give you some tips, but don't let that other person take over, because that's not the point. You won't learn from that too much. How is Zulu Uniform Sierra Hotel Whiskey handling the long flights? That was this aircraft we're flying, the new Sling High Wing.
Sierra Hotel Whiskey, our little baby, how is she handling? From my experience, amazing. And Maurits is a bit more on the technical side.
So the High Wing is mostly based on their previous model, the TSI, which has basically the same specs. It's the same wing, the same engine, just a low wing, and these aircraft have a different fuselage. That's the main difference. This one's actually a little bit slower because it has a bigger tail and it's a little bit heavier. Because of that, it also has a little bit less takeoff performance. But I mean, it's still, compared to a Cessna 172, it outperforms it. Maybe not as much on the takeoff roll.
It's performing a little less than the TSI, which has like the shortest takeoff roll ever.
For the rest, in flight, we've been cruising at 130 knots at 30 liters an hour.
The Garmin suite, it's just so sleek. And what I really love personally is that the fuel consumption is very steady on 30 liters an hour, and that just makes it very nice for planning for long trips. I mean, we have 7.5 hours endurance for this trip, which is very comforting, and it runs on AFGAS and MOGAS, so car fuel as well.
And lastly, the handling, it really flies like a sport plane. It has quite short wings compared to Cessnas, for example, so you can really get that bank angle in, especially have some speed, and it's a lot of fun. What is your dream in the future with aviation?
For me, I really want to fly helicopters commercially. I would love to do sling loading, medevac, all of that kind of stuff. So hopefully next year I can finish off my CPL for the rotor wing. And then for fixed wing, I have always said I want to do humanitarian work flying the Cessna Caravan. I am more than happy to fly the single-engine turbine, maybe at some point a multi-engine turbine, maybe the King Air, but I have no interest in going into the airline. So I would love to fly some more hands-on missions. I'd love to fly a lot in Africa, and like you said, do trips like this, but in the sense that I would love to do these flying adventures, so not necessarily for a job, but to have the freedom to be able to do trips like this. We do, however, see that it's really quite expensive, so we have to save up a little bit of money for it, but it is an incredible way to travel.
Would you have done something different in your flying career? If so, what?
I did my private license in South Africa, and then did my commercial license in the Netherlands, and then my night rating, but I never ended up doing my instrument rating at this beginning because I already had my first job offer doing scenic flights and dropping skydivers, so I didn't need the instrument rating. But because your CPL subjects lapse at some point, you need to do your IFR at some point before those 3 years pass. And I realized that I waited until the end, and that led to me doing my multi-engine instrument rating in quite a rushed time. I did it in 8 weeks, which is crazy, and it went well, and the training was incredible. I did it at Bartolini in Poland. I really had a good time, but for my personal experience, I couldn't enjoy it as much because I was in a massive rush. So I think maybe having done it earlier in my training would have been something I would have changed.
So touching upon what you just mentioned, someone asks, so many young pilots are completely airline driven while your goals are flying caravan in Africa. Is there any reason in particular you're not interested in airline pilot life?
I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings with answering this question. I love flying. I love hands-on flying. I love the adventure, being able to take a plane and land it in interesting, crazy places. So I've always been very much interested in the feeling of flying. And I think with airlines, a lot of it is actually having a managerial task, managing a flight deck, working together, which is, I'm sure, very fun. I think in an airline you do your takeoffs and landings, and you climb out to your cruise flying level, and so much of it is really like a managing task. I just feel personally that that is not something that interests me at all. I mean, even we see it when we fly together. Maurits is incredible with planning, really going into the details of making sure that our fuel consumption is right, like really monitoring what's going on. And I think, I know it's not a very good trait to have, but I'm a little bit like, I like fly, feeling that, and we'll see how it goes. That's something I want to work on, but I can tell that I'm much more on like the mission itself. That's why airline life has never interested me. I understand that the life you live and the income you can probably get working for an airline is all very comfortable, and it's a very comfortable life to have. I've never been driven to have a job to earn the money, so I wouldn't want to have a job that doesn't interest me if I could do something instead that I love, even though it earns less money. Water break. Interesting fact for people, and this is also something we didn't know because it's very counterintuitive, but the Nile actually streams from south to north, which is so strange.
So the Nile itself actually starts in Khartoum. It's where the Blue Nile and the White Nile come together into the Nile itself, and one of them comes from Ethiopia, and the other one comes from Uganda. It's crazy to think that the water that streams in Cairo actually began in Khartoum.
Next question.
A question from Holland, 60-year-old Dutchie, and I would love to start gliding. Any advice on where and how to start?
Well, this is a good question for you to answer.
So we both actually started our flying careers as glider pilots and doing glider training. You started when you were 15, I started when I was 18. And gliding is the best way to actually learn how to fly because you don't have an engine, so you're actually truly flying based on the Earth's power and the thermals and the heat of the air, rising air that keeps you in the air. And it's really not comparable to engine flying because you're not flying A to B in a straight line. You really have to look at nature and understand what's going on, and you really learn the basics of handling and flying your circuits. To answer the question is, I think the most important thing is find a gliding club that's closest to you, because you'll spend a lot of time at the airport, because gliding is usually a club activity, and trust me, you'll spend 10 hours, 12 hours a day at the airport and fly for 15 minutes, and it sounds really shitty, but usually it's a lot of fun and you learn a lot. At least in Europe, you can start gliding when you're 14, I think that's worldwide, which is super cool that you could be a 14-year-old pilot flying solo, but not drive scooters or cars. And additionally, it's a super cool environment where you usually have old Air Force pilots, airline pilots, and just enthusiasts all together, which is a really important mix where you can learn a lot of aviation things from a lot of different people. Where do you get all the info to fly in a foreign country? From a French PPL to fly in Namibia. So this guy probably has a French PPL and wants to fly in Namibia. Well, we both got our pilot license in South Africa, so we have a South African PPL and then later converted it to an EASA PPL, so we have both. So we can rent and hire, and that's why we can fly this South African registered aircraft.
If you want to fly in a foreign country, you can do two things. You can either validate or convert your license. So that's what you do. And for all the information, I mean, as we said, we use FlightChops, a navigation tool that has all the information you need.
And then Google is your friend. I mean, there are a few companies that will help you arrange this in advance, because when validating or converting, you do need to do some theory exams and usually a skill test or a flight with an instructor. And then it needs to be applied for, so this usually can take some time. So I believe there are some companies that can speed up this process.
And another big tip is find out if there is like an aviation forum on the internet for the country that you fly in. So for example, South Africa, they have this forum site called AVCOM, and you can ask any single question you have on there, and a lot of people will come to help you and answer your questions. And you can also go on that forum and see if the question has already been asked before.
Do you have an aerobatic license?
No. I have done quite a bit of aerobatics, and I started gliding super young, and then just at one point when I was like 15, I realized I loved doing aerobatics. So in gliders I was allowed to do some positive G aerobatics, but then at some point they changed the license requirements and you had to really follow a aerobatics training, and I didn't. So I love aerobatics. I think it's super cool. Also in fixed wing I've done a bit of aerobatics training, but for now it doesn't really have my main priority.
Are you interested in historic aviation?
Well, yeah, I'm interested in historic aviation. I mean, it is incredible to see the development of aircraft throughout the years. And we were recently in Duxford in the UK and saw the Imperial War Museum and the American Air Museum, and to see all those incredibly preserved old aircraft there was fantastic.
So a very popular question that always comes up is, how do you finance your air travel? And I think everyone always tries to avoid these sort of questions, but I think we can open up a little bit about it. And I think we've been very much in the fortunate situation that we have had this YouTube platform and been able to create relationships with companies because of it, and that they see the interest in promotion of it. And for example, for the past trip with Sierra November Golf, another Sling, all we had to do was pay for fuel, and they did the maintenance and all the other costs. They took that upon them, and it used 20 liters an hour, so that was very affordable to fly that aircraft.
And Maudis actually paid.
Yeah, and I paid for that because it was my hour building. So I was very lucky to be able to get an extremely good deal because we have that relationship. For this trip, it's sort of the same again. Sling provided us with the aircraft, and we're flying it back, but with the deal that we'd pay for everything else. And when we started planning, we realized it would be actually a really expensive trip, somewhere around the 20,000 euros, which is crazy to think.
Yeah.
And then we started reaching out to companies who are willing to sponsor us for such a trip, and we reached out to you guys in a GoFundMe.
We received so much positive feedback on our GoFundMe. It was very awkward to reach out and ask for funding from our followers and from friends, and it was for me a big hurdle to overcome, but we realized that, you know, people love the adventure. I really hope that we can give back by the videos that we make and the information that we can share. So that's how we're funding this trip. So we are really, really working hard to get all the flights funded. We do these lavish trips, but in our normal life we don't spend excruciatingly amounts of money. All we want to do is adventure and make sure that we can make the ends meet.
Yeah, we're super thankful that the YouTube videos itself also generate revenue, so that always helps as well. They don't always cover the videos, and that's the hard thing with YouTube, that some videos get crazy amount of views and are definitely worth it, and some other videos get less views, and then maybe we have to chip in a little bit ourselves. And besides this, we also both have other jobs. I worked in a supermarket this summer, so whatever works for you. It's always difficult. Aviation is super expensive, and we've been in the fortunate position to make it work for us, and there's no one way to do it, but we're at least trying our best to make our adventure work and share as much with you guys that we all can enjoy and learn from each other.
Exactly, and one thing that I always believe in is networking is so important. It is so important to go out there, even if you're not flying, go to an air club, meet other pilots. You never know if there's someone out there that has tips for you, or if someone has a plane that you can hire for a relatively good price. That's what it's all about, and be a part of the aviation adventure, be a part of the community, and then you'll never know what will come out of that. I mean, because I've been very active in the aviation community from a young age, I've met a lot of people that have helped me out on my journey and have really supported my journey, supported my vision of wanting to work for a humanitarian organization, and that has really helped me out as well.
So I hope that sheds some light and answers a bit of your questions.
So no, we are not multi-millionaires, but we don't want to be either.
Someone asked the cheapest way to build ours in South Africa.
Buy in bulk?
Buy in bulk is always good. Cheap, fuel-efficient aircrafts, which are Sling 2s, which are Savannahs.
Yeah.
They don't fly too fast, the Savannahs at least. The Slings are really capable. KFA bush planes for tail dragger. Those aircraft are usually available at flight schools. Definitely do try, fly a lot of hours, make trips, longer trips. You'll learn, firstly you'll learn a lot more from them, visiting new airfields, problem solving. And also, if you fly a lot in a short amount of time, you'll get really current, something that won't really unlearn. And just Google around. AFCOM is your friend for South Africa. There are usually also a lot of private people that'll rent out their plane to you. So go to AFCOM, make a post, and people will help you there.
Before Maudis asks the last question, it might be nice to explain a bit of the further routing towards South Africa.
So today we're flying to Kenya. We'll spend about a week there. Then we'll spend 2 weeks in Tanzania, because you grew up there, so we'll be seeing lots of Tanzania.
Which will be like coming home for me.
Then we'll fly to Malawi, which we've been before, but we haven't been to Lilongwe yet, so that would be cool to see that city. And then we'll meet up with a bunch of other Sling pilots, and hopefully a bunch of other Sling aircraft, and then we'll do about a week of flying through Botswana and Namibia.
Before making our way back to Johannesburg.
So last question, talking about Tanzania, where you grew up, is someone asked, what would you say to your younger self?
What would I say to my younger self? I think I would tell my younger self to not worry too much about what people think. I mean, people are so much more busy with themselves than with you, and that insecurity is not necessary. I mean, trust the process, trust yourself, trust your instinct. Oftentimes as a kid I was very worried about how other people thought of me, and I think that wasted a lot of my energy, because in the end you can't please everyone. You can only be a good person, and that'll show through everything. So I'd also tell my younger self that I was proud of her, and yeah, that life has been really good. So we are approaching the border of South Sudan and got a couple of hours left to go, but we're going to end the video off here. I really hope you enjoyed these questions and that it gave you a little bit more insight about us and about our journey. We'll see you soon.
And if you have any more questions, just ask them below. We'll try to answer some of them in the comments.
Clear to land runway 09, service in 070 at 16 knots.
Refueling, clear to land runway 09 at Territorial Escape.
Finally, after a few dry days in Sudan. Cheers.